All right, here is the beginning of the lecture on young and middle adulthood. We did cover the some of the biological and cognitive, those different types of development. Sorry, on the online portion last week, where you talked to either the same individual or multiple individuals, how they experience those different changes as they are now in adulthood, and the responses were very interesting. It seemed pretty consistent around everyone experiencing similar biological changes, a lot of graying hair. I mean, I can speak to that as well. I'm 37, and out of the blue, I just got like a crap ton of gray hair, so that's fun. My skin is dry, I need lotion. So a lot of those things I'm experiencing and can actually see firsthand actually occurring, and it sounded like many of the individuals you interviewed could as well. So that was great participation. Good reflections on the forum post as well, starting to talk about those trends. A lot of you talked about moving in and out of a parent's household, how that looks different than it used to. The age of marriage looks different as well. You had good insight into that. So thanks for participating, those who did, on the online class last week. That was kind of the introduction to this stage. And I decided to combine young and middle together just because it's hard to differentiate a little bit the young and middle, because depending on different life events, trajectories, transitions, people might experience different things that feel more like middle adulthood early on. Some people age faster, so it made more sense to combine them and then just kind of take 2 sessions to talk about them as a whole. So the focus today is more on relationships and the role of this stage versus some of the changes, so you can anticipate that. All right. So ways to define adulthood. The first natural one is to think about the biological age, and so we've defined this stage as 16 through, I believe, 70. I'm totally spacing. So it's a really big life stage, thinking about years of age versus anything else. And so if you're looking at that, it's the completion of growth during this stage. You're not growing much more. In fact, many people start to experience shrinking during this stage, and reproductive capacity by the end of this stage has virtually gone away. I mean, you do hear of cases of older adults becoming pregnant, but the anticipated normal development of your biology during this stage is the end of the reproductive capacity. And so for women, that's experiencing menopause, and men, they're just, the potency of their sperm goes down, and they're not able to necessarily provide viable sperm that would turn into a child. There's also the psychological age. And so a lot of times, like, you think about growing up, and like when you're an adult, you're grown up. And a lot of that has to do with the psychological development. There's different spheres of that. Some of that was this, a lot of this stuff was focused more on in the online class. But you have traits that are typically associated with adult. If you are sane, level-headed, have a good sense of morality, right and wrong, you're able to rationalize decisions, not so impulsive or emotional. A lot of responsibility, having the wisdom from lived experience, and conducting yourself in a what we would consider a mature way. Those are often seen as benchmarkers of being an adult. Some reach those at different stages, some reach them not at all. Some of them could be present even in late adolescence, given the life situation. If someone has had to kind of adopt more of an adult role during that life stage, you might see some of those psychological traits present in early adolescence as well. You also have this social age, and the fourth bullet point in here I put in large caps is it's largely based on cultural contexts and the kind of those social norms. And so for American society, when you turn 18, you're considered an adult. You have lots of rites of passages, potentially. Not as many in American culture. I mean, when you turn 18, you have the right to vote. You can join the military. You can buy cigarettes. Actually, no, that's 21 now. They changed that. I forgot about that, I believe. Previously, when you turned 18, you could drink until they changed the drinking age to 21. And so socially, they kind of define when you're seen as an adult. Some of the other like social benchmarkers of being an adult is if you gain financial independence, move out of your family's home, having more emphasis on taking care of others, so your family, having a job or employment. Marriage and parenthood are also sometimes a marker of becoming an adult. Again, that can happen in early or late adolescence. And so that kind of, when you start to take on responsibility of somebody else, that might indicate that you're an adult. But then on the flip side, what happens, and if you don't have children or don't get married or even want to be married or have children, does that mean you're not an adult because you haven't met that social benchmarker? And so that's why you kind of look at adulthood through different lenses, because you can't solely define being an adult or becoming an adult based on one specific factor. So some key ideas around middle adulthood. It's a large age span, which I mentioned in the last slide, and actually incorrectly said 70 years was the end, 60-ish years. It's kind of ambiguous. Again, it's just a huge lifespan. A 17-year-old is so different than a 60-year-old. And so much life happens in this stage. And so it's really hard to be able to talk about all the specific nuances of it. But things that occurred during this life stage really can hold power for how individual journeys through the whole life stage. The identity development that started in adolescence continues into adulthood. Where in adolescence, that primary task was identity formation. It's not like, oh, you hit 18 or 21 and your identity has been formed. We are very fluid individuals, and that can change over the course of adulthood. So it's kind of this continuation of self-exploration. Many things can impact the identity formation, so the relationships, employment is a huge piece of identity in this stage, and so work experience can kind of influence how you perceive yourself, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a future slide. The social relationships play a major role in life satisfaction and physical well-being across the life course, and so one of the main tasks in this stage is the establishing intimate relationships. Intimacy looks very different, and that's kind of one of the key topics in this lecture and in this life stage. And so we'll talk again a little bit more about that in the future slides. But that's really where the search is, the social relationships tying directly to the identity formation, and how either positive or negative relationships can really impact how we see ourselves in the midst of the world. Work, like I said, is kind of a major theme and a major influence during this stage, and it can have different meanings for different people. So for some people, work might solely be just a way to have money and to provide for life. There's no personal value. There's no satisfaction coming from it. It's simply plug and chug, get the money, get the paycheck, and viewing it through there. It's for many others, it's a life routine and structuring of time. And so I know we kind of, I've talked about this with my seniors this year about their upcoming graduation and how that's such a significant change from routine, where you have been a student for your whole life and you kind of have that ebb and flow of like the fall marks the beginning of a new year, and then you gut it out for 9 months, and then summer hits, it's a different change of pace. You have an ending and a beginning of a school year. And so you get very used to that cycle and flow. But once you graduate from college, if you don't continue at your education, you don't necessarily have that fall, winter, summer ebb and flow that the school system does. Now, teachers in some aspects have it because we do have a summer break, we have an academic year. But typically, if you're working in an office from 8 to 5 or whatever your hours are, there's no beginning and end. It's just this continual cycle. And so that's an adjustment in kind of structuring time in your life routine. And after you do it for a while and you become comfortable and you think down towards the end of the stage, those who enter into retirement, it's another huge adjustment back to not having that structure and routine. And so that kind of factors into the time piece too. If you're looking at that, how time passes through a job, people have benchmarks of, oh, you've been with a company for 10 years, 15 years, etc. And it kind of dictates some of the time and how people engage and interact with their employment. It can serve as a source of identity and status, and so many times individuals are looking for a raise or a promotion within the company, and so that can kind of, for better or for worse, give positive identity or negative identity. And so if you're not getting passed over for promotions, or if you're in a setting where people are using their job titles to gloat or for glory, blue collar jobs, white collar jobs, people can have some negative or positive connotations with where they are as a employee. I remember when I got my job as a professor, I still think it sounds pretty cool, but I took a lot of pride in being able to say, like, oh, I'm a college professor, and like you get like good reactions sometime. And I was fairly young when I started being a professor, so that was like, got some good status and identity from it, for better or for worse, but it did kind of influence how I felt about myself in a positive way. A context for social interaction. If you're working 8-9 hours a day, you're spending a huge chunk of your waking hours at your workplace, and so oftentimes you get your work friends, the people you hang out with, they know you on your good days, on your bad days, and they kind of become a primary source of interaction. So this working from home has really put a different spin on kind of those circles that get developed at work and some of those positive peer relationships. And the isolation has increased, and some of the work camaraderie. I know that Kuiper being so small, there tends to be a lot of close relationships within the faculty and staff, and not being able to be on campus or being able to freely go in and out of each other's offices for meetings, it has put a different feel on kind of the relational community that Kuiper has. And it has kind of impacted work morale at times because we just aren't as connected, and kind of having that, oh, let's just go sit down in the lunchroom and eat lunch. It's like, oh, go sit 6 feet away from me, and if you cough, I'm out of here. It just kind of puts a different feel on everything. And I kind of mentioned this with the status and identity, that meaningful experience can provide a sense of accomplishment, both in a very like altruistic way, or just like being able to achieve things. People often put goals and benchmarks around how they want to advance in their career, and so work can kind of either be a positive way to reinforce that, or if you're not achieving your goals as expected, it can also have a negative influence as well. And so I'm going to wrap this lecture up a little bit. As we transition into relationships in adulthood, it's going to be kind of the primary focus on the next slide. But relationships in adulthood have been shaped by relationships earlier in life. And so we talked about attachment during the early stages and how often the attachment in infancy can predict how individuals will have attachment in adult relationships. And so infants who develop a secure attachment with their caregivers often show that they do have healthier relationship, or the ability to engage in healthier relationships, because there's more of a sense of trust in that needs are being met, versus those who had more of the anxious attachment styles. They crave the closeness, but they don't necessarily trust that they'll be given it to it, so it can then turn into some of those acting out or maladaptive behaviors, worried that a partner will leave, they're overly dependent on them, not having an identity outside of the individuals they're seeking a relationship with. I'm going to wrap it up here because Screencast-O-Matic, which I record these through, only allows you to do 15-minute chunks. So I'm going to wrap this up and then start the next one, which will talk a little bit more about relationships in depth.